live.
No,
We're live.
Are.
We're live.
Yes, we
are. We live?
We are live on Twitch.
But Ben, the sun's up. We can't be live yet.
Yeah, because we're vampires.
Yeah, because daylight savings time happens since our last episode. I feel like we haven't recorded a lot of episodes where the sun is actually still up when we're
we've got
here.
some good natural light today.
Yes.
And speaking of natural light, the light of the Triforce shines through us all.
I don't think that's a line from the game.
Ben. I don't think that it is, but it is a terrible and fumbling segue into what we're talking about today, and that is The Legend of Zelda.
The Legend of Zelda.
So let's go ahead. Let's start with what's Zelda mean to you?
Yeah, I know that this season we've been talking about the hero's journey a lot, and I will say that to me, The Legend of Zelda, a video game series that's very famous, probably, to me the most famous of video game series. It really is the quintessential hero's journey for me. A boy goes on a journey to defeat a villain, get some supernatural aid, and I will say that it's a very, cherished part of my childhood. I find myself often just in tears, in many of the Zelda nostalgic kind of moments, and I listen regularly to like the Zelda cast from Zelda Dungeon, and a lot of other guys. So I very much I admire Zelda. It's a part of my identity. I will say that. And Ben,
big Zelda guy.
I'm a big Zelda guy.
You're the Zelda guy.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Ben, you've had a different experience.
I've had a different experience, a bit of a different experience with Zelda. Yeah. I always knew that Zelda was around. It is one of the first games that I ever played. My family had an NES, and that was one of the games that we owned. And I have a lot of fond memories early in my childhood of playing with my dad, with my older sister, and with my older brother, and them showing me things, like impressing a 5-year-old with being able to knowing that you can walk through a wall or that you can blow up a tree or something like that. And then I actually, for much of my childhood, did not realize that like more video game systems came out. So my family skipped the SNES completely, and my introduction to the next graphical achievement in video games was when my brother came home with a PlayStation after he'd been away at college for a bit, and so I missed out on the N64 entirely. I really didn't play much Nintendo until the Wii, when that took everybody by storm, and I picked one up and I played Twilight Princess. On that, I'd played a little bit. Like, my brother had a GameCube and sometimes let me play it, and so I like screwed around a bit in like Wind Waker and the remasters, Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask that came with that, but I didn't really play them that much. And then I played Breath of the Wild on the Switch. That, if I remember correctly, the attachment rate of Breath of the Wild on the Switch was something like 82% in the first year or something huge. Like that. Switch, everybody got it.
Everyone was playing Breath of the Wild on the Switch.
And I thought it was incredible. And so I would say before the last couple of weeks, or knowing that we were going to do this episode, I wasn't really a Zelda guy. I as a kid, I drew a lot, and so like I liked Link and I would draw him sometimes. But mostly because I thought he was cool from the NES game. Right. Yeah. And I had a few of the Game Boy games, but I never got all the way through them. And so for this podcast today, you recommended to me, you're the biggest Zelda fan that I know in my circles. And so I said,
somehow I give that impression. I'm never even sure how I do that.
Yeah. How do you give that with,
crap.
We even got Zelda there. Amiibos in the back.
He's up there.
I played you on your recommendation. I played Ocarina of Time, which was a pretty awesome experience. I'm excited to get into a bit more as we discuss it today. But I think before we get into the meat and potatoes of analyzing Zelda as two therapists and two bros talking about stuff they like, I think you have a recognition that you'd like to make.
Yeah, our recognition for today goes to Therapist Kirby on Instagram. He also hosts a therapy podcast about mental health, and I absolutely love your memes that you post on your Instagram with Pokemon and inspirational quotes. So good work, Therapist Kirby, doing the Lord's of work out there, if you will.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to have you out on the internet doing what you do.
Yeah.
So I've just got here for us to start jumping in on what is the Legend of Zelda. We kind of described it a little
Yep.
bit, but to go back a step for people that maybe aren't into video games that might be listening, what is it? It's a video game.
Yes, it is a video game. Yeah, so the first Legend of Zelda came out on Nintendo Entertainment System in 1986, and my understanding is that
Wouldn't that be the Famicom?
yeah, nerd. My understanding is that Zelda actually invented saving in video games. That previously,
really?
there really wasn't much of a save feature in video games, and even in Zelda, it's not terribly robust. You'll save, and you'll always actually go back to the same point at like the beginning of the game if you're on the overworld, or if you're in a dungeon, you will go back to the beginning of a dungeon. And so it will actually save your progress in some of the things that you've done. Whereas previously, a lot of games were like arcade style, where you would go, kind of like I think Star Fox 64, where you go through a certain number of levels and then you report like a high score. But that saving in a plot was something that was fairly revolutionary at the time. In Zelda 1986, and more or less it had a little bit of a story to it, but nothing entirely wild. It started with this idea that Ganon has stolen the Triforce of Power, and that you have to reassemble the Triforce of Wisdom to rescue the Princess Zelda. It was very much like a high fantasy
young knight, future knight kind of guy.
Rescues the princess at the end of the game.
And you get magical gadgets to help you solve puzzles along the way.
So I feel like it went from, kind of like this high fantasy, very basic thing into something a lot more sophisticated today. I think that if a lot of people say, Breath of the Wild, a lot of gamers are going to know what you're talking about. And Zelda has evolved into possibly one of the most important video game franchises of all time. And I will say that the hero's journey is really present in every story. I mean, if you look even at the original Legend of Zelda, you'll definitely see that, this is a hero's journey. Link goes into the first cave. He sees the old man, and says, it's dangerous to go alone. Take this. It's very timeless. There's many t-shirts with that printed. I don't have a t-shirt with that on it. I think that, you got a birthday gift for next year idea. But, I think the hero's journey has always been super apparent in Zelda. And Ocarina of Time is definitely one of the really, what I'd say probably the biggest entry in the series. There's kind of like the Legend of Zelda original, then there's Ocarina of Time, and then there's Breath of the Wild. And yes, there's many games in between that I think have a lot of value, but I think that those three are definitely the landmark ones that really made a big difference for the history of the Zelda series.
The saving thing is something that I didn't know.
And you'd have to I honestly would Google that, but I that's been the anecdotal thing that I've heard, is that it was very revolutionary in its use of saving.
Well, I'm thinking about it too, because so many games on the NES that we had as a family, Mega Man in particular, and like Contra, where you put in a password. It would spit out if you would get a certain distance into the game and you wanted to leave it and turn it off, you had to go to the show password screen and then write down where the dots were on the grid so that you could put that in on the main menu to get back to your current Mega Man boss completion state. And so that's, I mean, even if it isn't the very first one, it's darn early in it, now that you mention it. Hadn't thought about it that way. That's pretty incredible. I having just played Ocarina of Time, I'm pretty excited about it. I thought it was really good. Yeah, I'll give away my initial review of it. I thought it was pretty incredible. Having had that experience of skipping a generation of consoles and experiences around video games, I knew that I was missing something, but it's one of those I know I'm going to go encounter something when I go play this that will be new to me, and knowing that isn't the same as experiencing it. And experiencing it was a really incredible experience. Having played the NES one and having so many fond memories, particularly with my family, just being like a 5-year-old with much older brother, much older sister, dad that's into gaming, a mom that played Super Mario Bros. And Zelda and lots of the classic games and stuff. That's like family time to me.
Yeah.
And then having played Breath of the Wild pretty recently, I felt like I was like an archaeologist, finding missing links in my own, pun intended, missing link, that were there for the development of games and how game design goes. It was pretty incredible to see the ways that Ocarina of Time really introduced a lot of elements that were things that kind of started in the NES game, but they expanded it to be something so concrete that you then can see they play on that theme in a way very similar to a game series that I really enjoy is Final Fantasy. And I was unaware, it was a little bit of a dang Nintendo, I did not know your game, that like the amount of things that thematically rhyme with one another that show up in all of these theories that through the lens of playing Ocarina of Time, and you're really kind of reviewing it and thinking about it for this podcast, I felt like I had such a great and unique experience of like seeing the ways that these connect. And then as a big fan of Dark Souls, I felt like, wow, I can see the origins of one of my favorite game genres here. And I didn't realize how close they were, chimpanzees and bonobos having a more recent common ancestor. It was one of those like, whoa, this feels like Dark Souls at time. Mm-hmm. And it was easy for me to imagine, I bet a guy was playing this and thinking, if we made this harder on purpose, we could really do something with it.
What if everything was the Shadow Temple?
Yeah, what if everything was the Shadow Temple was a big one that I thought, because that's another thing. I played Twilight Princess, and that's my other thought on Ocarina of Time. I've played Twilight Princess, and everybody tells me, or everybody says on the internet that that's the darkest or the grittiest game. And the Shadow Temple in Ocarina of Time is like not for children. It was wild. Yeah. It was awesome.
Evil eyes, blood,
the
blood,
the eyes, the torture
the
devices.
dead hands in your face.
Yeah.
The Dead screeching at you, and falling through the floor randomly.
Yeah. And I think that we'll get into that a bit later on too. It was really interesting as playing this as an adult and knowing that my friend who had played this as a kid and has played it since as an adult had recommended this to me, and so I'm having I can't help but be a children's therapist and think about the experience of children versus adults in interacting with this medium. And it was so interesting for this story, the story of Ocarina of Time in particular, having a time travel element where your main character that you're playing through begins as a child and through portions of the game advances time forward to them being an adult, and then has to go back to their childhood and solve problems, and then go back to their adulthood and solve problems. The metaphors for therapy abound. The usefulness for hooks in narrative based therapy techniques, particularly in assessing and dealing with trauma, are incredibly present in the story of Ocarina of Time.
Yeah, and I understand what you mean. Yeah, the idea that adults really have to go back and they have to address their inner child in a lot of ways, or something that happened to them as a child, but where they can actually do the real work that they have to do as an adult. Yeah,
and particularly as well, there even the elements of like later in the game, after you've been playing as an adult for a while, you come across a temple that you must go back in time, and you need the kid for this one.
Yeah.
And the metaphor and the narrative there of allowing one's inner child to come out in order to solve the problems of adulthood was not lost on me as an adult, playing this. And it was compelling, even as an adult, to play through this and to obviously identify with adult Link more. And yet know that I would have identified with young Link as a boy. And I would have lavished the experience of getting to play through this game where I get all these cool skills as a kid, and I get to see what I will look like 7 years in the future with even more stuff. And I'm even better at stuff.
And I think that even as a child, I didn't really understand it at the time, but that I would play this game growing up like once a year after I had played it for the first time, which I can't even remember how old I was. I remember playing it on the Zelda Collector's Edition disc, which I had borrowed from a friend. And I think that it was something that, you can do something and grow up and go save people, and that to me was profound. I also think that like replaying it is a lot more different than like if you play it at all, if like the first time you play it, Because when you leave Saria from the beginning of the game, basically you start in the Kokiri Forest. You're a kid. You get called by the Great Deku Tree, and you go there. You help him out. Turns out he dies anyway. So kind of like the wise sage is telling you to do something. He sends you on the quest to kind of save the world a little bit. And then as you leave the forest, your childhood friend Saria is there, and she's looking at you with longing eyes about like, oh, are you really leaving us? Are you leaving the forest? And there's a sadness there as you kind of leave childhood. And I think that moment is really important too.
And it's a forest of ever children, like Peter Pan.
Forever children, like Peter Pan.
Yeah.
Yeah, magical forever children.
Yeah.
And yeah, leaving the forest is an important moment there. But then Link does encounter the princess and kind of the royalty. Yeah.
For people in the chat that just joined, we are talking about the Legend of Zelda series as a whole, but right now we're talking about Ocarina of Time.
Yes, Zelda is dope as fuck.
Yeah, Zelda is pretty dope. But you were just talking about Saria, and actually I want to curve us into that because I've been chewing on it a bit. I think that more recent Zelda games, story-wise, at least as far as I've noticed, have had less of that role-playing kind of cathartic experience, and I think some of it can be attributed to it being earlier in video games, and I do think that there's evidence that Zelda is intended for all audience, not just children, especially with like the Shadow Temple. I was really aware of the fact that you've kind of got this like childhood girl thing, girlfriend maybe, in Saria. And then in childhood, you also meet Melon, who wants to be whisked away by a knight.
The number of internet arguments about like Link is with Zelda, Link is with Saria, Link is with Melon is insane.
And then Ruto, the
Princess
Ruto,
who he gets engaged to on accident,
which is a very classic chivalric trope, actually, in medieval literature about knights.
Yeah,
which I thought was really interesting. With how much this game feels more closely connected to that fantasy history.
Yeah.
The fantasy writing history. That while that element is present, like I was saying with Final Fantasy, it rhymes with itself. That element of a betrothal to the Zora princess is also in Breath of the Wild. There's an element to it that, or what I'm getting at, I guess, is there are a lot of role opportunities for a young man to encounter lots of women in this game, either as a kid or as an adult, that it kind of leaves very open-ended in this story. Link never is shown whisking off and marrying the princess. He's never shown whisking off and marrying the girl from the ranch. He doesn't get shown marrying any of them.
Well, and the reason that Link has his name is because he's the link between the player and the world, and you can choose the name of Link, and that was this thing that they introduced in the very first Zelda game, that they wanted Link to be a link between the player and the world. And what I think about Ocarina of Time that is so brilliant is that the story is actually quite simple. You can look at it, you can just be like, okay, yeah, boy goes, saves the world a little bit.
It's got a little bit of a bootstrap paradox thing, but
it does have the bootstrap paradox, but if you look at each of the stages kind of carefully, you actually see there's a little bit more to it. If you look at like his relationship with Saria, he only has a few lines of dialogue there, but Sheik comes in and has kind of like an eloquent speech that's a little bit more like 5 lines and explains a memory from childhood kind of matters and blah blah blah, this is why it matters, here's a song. And then when you get to the Fire Temple, it's a burning passion of friendship, grows
Darunia.
stronger, with Darunia, gets there, Link's sworn brother from the Gorons, and then a piece of love from with the Serenade of Water and the Ice Temple, grows into something a bit stronger. And there's different kind of analyses of these different relationships as someone gets older, and so I do feel like Ocarina of Time is a treatise on aging in a lot of ways, becoming a man from being a boy. But also I think that this is something that's across a lot of Zelda games where if you look at the Wind Waker, really a lot of the advertising that was done for that game talks about a boy becoming a man. I remember that from the advertisement growing up, where
I remember that from inside comic books and stuff. It'd have the picture of him on.
It's
on
his
the boat.
birthday at the beginning of the Wind Waker, and he's in the Outset Island Lobster T-shirt that's also somewhat famous now. And then I put on the hero's garb for just that day because he's becoming a man. He looks so uncomfortable putting it on, but then actually realizes that he has to be kind of in that space space. And then when you get to even like Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword, there's definitely a lot more aging going on there too. In Twilight Princess, Link is a teenager, but he's kind of the guardian of some of the younger kids in Kakariko Village, and one of them, Colin, expresses that he wants to be just like Link when he grows up. So there's definitely kind of like a cycle of growing up that's going on in kind of the Zelda treatise, and I do think that growing up is a key part of a lot of different heroes' journeys.
Yeah. I thought that it was really interesting. One of the things that it made me think about the time traveliness and getting to see the effects of the things you do in the past in the future. It really reminded me of things that I've read about therapists using Dungeons and Dragons groups, particularly with younger boys, to give that experience of, in a role-playing scenario, the ability to practice thinking through actions with consequences and with what it might feel like to do something or another. It can be incredibly powerful in a therapy setting. And so I was very aware of it as I was playing it, that lots of young men would have, and women, but lots of young men would have experienced this kind of role-playing scenario where they're presented with the ability to see what happens if I help out this person in the past. And then I get to skip forward 7 years in the time, and it changes the future, and it helps the future.
Oracle of Ages, the Game Boy game, actually does that a little more robustly than Ocarina of Time, where you'll see the consequences in the future if you don't help them in the past.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like in Ocarina of Time, it's a little bit more like, this is just a part of the plot, and this is what's happening in there.
Yeah. You'll have to excuse if you're getting any of the dog's audio here. We've got a dog that really wants a blanket.
Ben's dog, Toad, is so cute.
Yeah. So, actually, one of the questions that I have for you here, because I know you've played... Have you played all of the Zelda games? Is there any that you haven't played? Have you played the CDI ones and stuff?
I have not played the CDI games, but I am familiar with all the CDI YouTube poops that are out there. They're pretty good if you haven't seen them. I posted all the cutscenes on our Facebook before this episode, but yeah, the only one that I haven't beat that's actually published by Nintendo is Triforce Heroes, and that was because it was just really difficult to do as one person, and also it honestly wasn't a very inspiring game. I did beat Zelda 2, even though it was very difficult.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that between homework and high school.
With that said, what would you say then are some that stick out to you? What are the things that are always present in the series? What are some things you can rely on in a Zelda game?
I think the thing that you can rely on in a Zelda game is that it is the hero's journey. And that's one of the reasons why I like it so much. And I think from a very young age, I identified with it. And I was like, hero this, hero that. I think you can always see that there is a hero's journey. I don't think that there's always a helpless princess, which is something that I also kind of appreciate about it. Even in the very first Zelda game, Princess Zelda destroys the Triforce of Wisdom so that Ganon can't have the full power, and then Link has to go reassemble it after she's kind of been like, I'm sabotaging his whole plan. In the second game, she does fall asleep, in the castle, in the North Castle or whatever, and she's a little bit more of a damsel in distress, but she becomes more of an active character in Zelda 3, Link to the Past, and then, Marin in Link's Awakening also becomes a little bit more active. She's also pretty active in Ocarina of Time.
Is Marin in Link's Awakening and Malon in Ocarina of Time related?
Yeah, so Marin and Tarin are two characters in Link's Awakening that were introduced on the Dream Island that it's a Koholint Island that Link's Awakening is in. And then Malon and Talon were based on those two characters. And ultimately, Malon and Talon were kind of based on Princess Peach and Mario.
Oh, really?
A little bit. So,
okay.
But yeah.
I see it now that you say that with the mustache.
It was a little bit more like distanced, I will say, where, in Ocarina of Time, they don't look so much like it, but if you kind of look at Link's Awakening,
my eyes and
if you look at Link's Awakening as a whole, there's Goombas, there's
the chain chomps,
so there's a little bit of that. I do think that, you can count on the hero's journey and all of them, but I also think that you can count on kind of like a balanced, I don't know. So the Triforce in Zelda, I feel like I look at Zelda and I do think about the Triforce a lot. I think that, it's the symbol for Link in Super Smash Bros. Or whatever. And it consists of power, wisdom, and courage. And I think that those are actually three of the things that you kind of need to do to get through Zelda. You do have to have combat prowess to defeat enemies. You also need, wisdom to get through the puzzles, some smarts. But you also kind of need the courage to kind of like, keep going and
try
do
new
things.
things.
And, to have the fortitude to actually finish the game. And so I feel like you also have this kind of like, balanced picture of, you could say masculinity or of the hero, of someone who not only is, strong, but also wise and honorable. And I think that that is something that you can definitely count on in all the Zelda games. But I will say that the adventures in each of them are really quite varied. I mean, if you're strictly speaking about gameplay mechanics, I mean, you can expect the sword and shield. Generally
a bow, maybe
you can
a
expect the
bomb,
bow, some kind of
boomerang.
distance thing. Some of them have the slingshot in lieu of the bow. Some of them don't even have Oracle of Ages. I think just has like the boomerang. But yeah, Link has tools that he uses.
There's some
in different
recurring
ways.
themes too, like somebody named Zora or some people named Zoras around water.
It's elemental
is going on a lot.
too.
Yeah.
I will say it's very high. I think that
and
Zelda,
there's a bunch of those, right?
Yeah, I think
that names tend to go with certain elements.
And I don't know if Zelda was the first one to do this, but a lot of Zelda games are very much like you have the forest temple, and you have the fire temple, and you have the water temple. There's like, I mean, if you go to like a Zelda wiki, you'll see forest temple. There's probably like 3 or 4.
Yeah.
I can't even remember all of them off the top of my head, but there's generally, like it's some kind of elemental sort of thought is a lot of the Zelda there. So it is associated with nature. I will say that music has been in the game since the very beginning. There is, I don't think it's an ocarina. I think it's the recorder, yes, in the first Legend of Zelda that allows you to warp between the little fairy fountains, which is pretty cool. And then, other Zelda games will also have, instruments in them. So Ocarina of Time obviously has the Ocarina of Time, and then in Majora's Mask,
the harp and one of the
yes, in Skyward Sword you have there's the goddess's harp, but then I will say the Harp of Ages in Oracle of Ages is a little more robust in my opinion than the goddess's harp from Skyward Sword. The goddess's harp you just kind of strum, and as someone who was in marching band, studied music, it's a little arbitrary like what you're doing there. It's like just harp with the pulse of the but yeah, you can choose different songs to play in the Oracle of Ages game. The musical instruments have been pretty consistent. I will say that Breath of the Wild kind of ditched that a little bit, that there weren't as many musical instruments. I'm trying to remember. I mean, music is certainly a central part of the game, and it's a part of the experience.
There's a lot of musical cues.
Cues.
Whether or not you've solved a puzzle, defeated an enemy, whether or not you found a secret, things like that, have little chimes to them. And like Final Fantasy, the Zelda series seems to kind of pick an element or a few themes and really turn them up to 11 for different entries and kind of change
there's
the
a gimmick
formula
in each game.
Yeah, and so like Ocarina of Time obviously is going to have more musical focus to it, but there are still ocarinas in other games. There are still elements of music that show up, just maybe not as prominently.
It's a time travel game, ultimately.
Yeah.
It's kind of what it is.
Speaking of that, that's another thing that I know, I'm aware of from Link's Awakening at least, and I'm pretty sure a couple others, but Ocarina of Time fits into this as well. There does seem to be several of them that it's the ending of it is he woke up from a dream, or Ocarina of Time is he's back to being a kid on the day that he met Zelda, or what have you. That there's a Mario game that does this too, and a Kirby game that does this. There's stories or narratives that are in that area of fiction where there's the final twist is that it's like speculative, or that did it really happen? Was the dream real? This is a world where magic is real.
It could be a boy's fantasy.
Exactly.
In a way. Which I think is cool. It gives some realism to, I think, a lot of the fantasy battles that a lot of kids go through. Where they're just like, we're having a thing, and Ganon's over there, and we're gonna go fight him.
I was swinging swords in my backyard all the time.
For sure.
Definitely, Zelda is one of the origins of being in the backyard and thinking, I'm charging up power in my sword right now, and I'm gonna fling it at something.
The sword beam, yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
things like that. But just in general, Zelda is within the realm of a fantasy narrative, and so I wanted to touch on a little bit things that you find in narratives around knights, chivalry, squires, boys and men in those medieval, whether they're high fantasy or low fantasy settings, and things that Zelda has that are pretty common in those is you rescue a princess a lot. However, I will say that it feels like, to me, you might be able to tell me that this happens even earlier, but from Ocarina of Time on, the princess doesn't necessarily need you to save her all the time.
Zelda's an interesting. Zelda's an interesting princess in that she hasn't always needed saving. That she's often
not a damsel.
She's often an active participant, a little bit more than Peach is. Even from from the beginning, she destroyed the Triforce of Wisdom. In Ocarina of Time, she's really an active agent against Ganondorf for really like half the game, and then she does end up getting captured. But in the Wind Waker, it's similar. Spoilers. She's the pirate Tetra, and is an active ally of Link. And then eventually, it's revealed that she's the princess. Did you not know?
No.
My God, man. Well, I'm sorry.
I have to play Wind Waker. Hey, that's all right. You can spoil 15-year-old games.
It's a wonderful moment that actually felt pretty similar to Ocarina of Time.
I'm sure.
I played Wind Waker first, actually, and so it was surprising to me.
I couldn't escape the thought the entire time that I was playing Ocarina of Time. Every time that Sheikah came on screen, Sheik came on screen, I, perhaps a little pompously, but like, I'm pretty confident I would have clocked that as a kid, as like an 8 or a 9-year-old. I think that I would have clocked that immediately.
I won't say yes or no, but I will say that I was. I had played Super Smash Bros. Before Ocarina of Time, and so I just knew that Sheik was Zelda. And, Nintendo had decided to spoil their own game with Super Smash Bros. Melee, and that's what it was. In Twilight Princess, Zelda isn't helpless either. She does actually give up when Zant comes to take over, whatever, but also it does some stuff with Link and Midna to try and fight them off and whatever. And then ends up, helping Link in the final boss battle. And so Zelda really isn't a helpless person. But interestingly, Zelda is someone who often does end up needing assistance. So if you look at Breath of the Wild, for the entire game, Zelda's using her power to actually hold back Ganon, which is pretty like, oh man, that's a lot of power. If she's really doing that. She's
which is an example
for
of
100 years or something.
Yeah, what I'm saying with the picking an element or a theme that's present in many of them and turning it to 11, having just finished Ocarina of Time recently, she does that. And in the final battle with Ganon in Ocarina of Time, she like holds him back for a second, and that's like the final, you hit him with the big pig, and it's over, right? Taking that to an extreme in the narrative of Breath of the Wild of she's holding this dude down for 100 years for you,
which is also like, why is she still alive? I never understood that plot hole. If anyone knows, please put it in the chat. But
we're gonna go with magically preserving her own life at the same time or something, maybe.
Maybe Goddess Hylia energy, something like that. So Zelda hasn't been a damsel in distress, so I appreciate that reading. But there's also like if you don't do what you have to do, the world will end. And it's not all you. It is also working with someone else, in particular, a girl. And I think that is also meaningful and unique about this particular hero's journey.
Another thing that you get to role play by playing through these games is, especially if you're a young man that's playing these, is you get to role play being strong, right? You get to be capable of overcoming all of these bad guys, and in the same way that narratives about knights going on gallant adventures and saving princesses have entertained young men for generations upon generations, this offers a narrative structure or place for young men to encounter that active role playing, and has two therapists that work with kids a lot. We could go on about how important play is in the development of a brain.
The criticism of video games a lot of times is that it serves as a replacement for the real world. And what an opponent of Zelda, my most beloved game, would probably say is that instead of being a hero in the real world, such as standing up to a bully, you become a hero just in the video game, and it serves all that psychological need, and you don't have to do that again. What do you think about that as a perspective?
I think that's really interesting. I think that, to me, my initial reaction is that that's preposterous and that's not true.
We're both gamers here.
We can't do things without practicing them. And books are a great way that the brain can practice all sorts of things. And movies are books in front of you without the visual and and auditory imagination part. Video games are interactive movies. I don't see media, and especially literary realms or literary compositions, in a way that really differentiates video game from cinema to television series to novel. I think that they're so interchangeable. I think in thousands of years, far more advanced humans will think that it's trivial that we are differentiating those things from whatever it is that they are watching, doing, or experiencing at the time. But I think that given that perspective, I approach that situation from the thought that video games allow us to practice things that we normally wouldn't. And the fact that video games allow you to do things that are extraordinary beyond the real is part of the reason that they're appealing. And capitalism is really what we've got to, if we want to raise pitchforks about whether or not they're, being made with the same integrity and earnestness as books, which we could have that same conversation about, is capitalism producing the best books? If you have a problem with that, then I guess there's your answer. But to me, this is I think that my experience with Ocarina of Time was very much one of somebody that felt like I was interacting with a literary space and a gaming environment that was polished with absolute and utmost care by people that genuinely, truly believed that they were making something more than just a way to pass the time.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of the people sitting in the offices at Nintendo, and I don't know if they use any other publishers or
I think the
sub-companies,
Ocarina of
like,
Time was just Nintendo.
like Pokemon's Game Freak, and I know the puppies one is always Kirby, but I don't. Yeah, I think
HAL
Nintendo only.
Laboratories.
HAL Laboratories. Yep, you knew what I meant. This guy.
I was like, what are you talking? Oh, yeah.
Puppies. Yeah. But I don't know why I'm making this hand gesture like I can show you the dog that's suckling puppies on the logo. But
Sakurai.
the I don't even know where I was going with this.
That's okay, Ben.
I remember the puppies.
I think that we were talking about video games.
Nintendo cared.
Nintendo cared about what they were making.
Yeah.
And I think that it's important to recognize that people can play video games and they can also be heroes in real life. I think that if you're in therapy and you're just talking about making change in your life, but you're struggling applying it in your daily life, I think that that's a different issue than, you're not practicing it at all.
Yeah.
So I do think that it can be hard to be bold in real life. I think about growing up, I was someone who loved playing Zelda, but also wasn't like the most like outgoing person in real life at all. I was a very anxious kid, and I think that Zelda was a way for me to express myself in a more confident way. And I think that over time I did learn a little bit more about how to be myself in front of other people, and I'm happy that I did. But I do think that if you are someone who's struggling with applying whatever you're feeling in your real life, I think that it's okay to go out there and do that sometime. And I'd love to hear about how that went. So
yeah. Final thought for our first half segment here is, what can Link teach us as men? What should I do if I see myself in Link?
Yeah, I think that you should be Link.
You should be Link. Yeah.
I think that you should embrace the identity of the hero and do the thing, and feel good about it.
Yeah. I think that question I'm asking a little bit cheekily, because I'm supposing something that we haven't directly addressed, but I think particularly thinking about Zelda really made me think about this a lot, and I think to share for the record of the podcast, or to get out there, that fundamentally in approaching narratives in the way that I do, I think that narratives can tell us a lot, and I think that they can tell the nature of art is that they can tell different people different things, at wildly different times. But I do attribute to the idea that is found within narrative modalities of therapy that if it doesn't really matter whether or not how accurate somebody is really, but if somebody can identify with a story and they share that with me as a therapist, one of the things that I now have is a tool by which I can help them to navigate their own life and immediately develop a shared language through which we can talk about the ways that, if somebody sees themselves as Link, they might mean that they see themselves as somebody that's stuck between a boy inside a man's body, right? But they also might mean somebody that has many challenges that are difficult ahead of them. And so we might end up talking about what's their fire temple and what's their forest temple. But as somebody else entirely, they might see themselves as Link and somebody that is destined to always play a specific role and to never get the princess or something like that. There are so many different interpretations of ways that people can attach themselves to narratives.
Yeah.
I think that one of the things that we can do for ourselves that it doesn't require you to go to therapy for, although it can be very helpful if you do in therapy, is ask ourselves, okay, I've identified what story I think I'm living. What does the character do next? If I am Prometheus and I am about to enter the underworld to face Medusa, if I know that Prometheus goes down to the underworld and faces Medusa and he has to look away from her and use his shield in an unexpected way to overcome her,
Yep.
I can guess for myself that my next challenge will be one, whatever I'm worried about in life, that I see as the Medusa I'm about to face as one that I might need to invent a new way of overcoming. And so
I think that people see heroes' journeys and they see stories like Zelda and they go, I want to be like that. And I think that society needs people like that, because if we didn't have heroes to stand up to, kind of like the established order or whatever's going on, when it's not just or not good, I think that society would be a much worse place. I think that we wouldn't have a lot of people, making waves, being heroes that are, powerful, wise, and courageous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That brings me back to, and I think we mentioned it in the Lord of the Rings episode, but it brings me back to the C.S. Lewis quote when he was asked why he wrote stories for children, specifically in the Chronicles of Narnia. And his answer was that the fantasy stories for children that he was writing about knights, he hoped would be sufficient to help them when they grow up and they realize that the real world really is full of knights and dragons. But oftentimes the knights don't always win the same way that they do in the stories of old. Yeah. And he wanted to write stories that inspired children to grow up to be the kinds of knights that could slay dragons and overcome them. And I think that I see that in the Legend of Zelda here. I see that attitude in the narrative a lot, that it feels like it is a timestamp of those writers and those game designers writing a letter to the children of that time. You can do it. And it's okay. If you notice that you are the good guy, it's okay to be the good guy. I think that's one of the things that I would say is unique or intense about The Legend of Zelda is how unapologetically pure the goodness of Legend of Zelda is. I think that's why maybe it can get a bit of a rap as being a kid's game, but I don't think that it necessarily is as much as a pure expression of a high level of original chivalry.
I am so glad that you said that while you were wearing a Venom t-shirt.
As I'm wearing a Venom t-shirt, yeah.
Venom, of course, is the anti-hero from Spider-Man.
Yes.
Ben, do you have a poorly explained philosophy for us?
I do. Speaking of perspectives and subjective things, and speaking of being a kid,
I'm ready to listen.
I have no great segue for this, but here's my attempt at one. Did you ever wonder, or do you recall ever wondering, or the first time maybe that you ever wondered, if other people see the same colors as you?
I've thought about that before.
Yeah, it's a common thought that a lot of us have. Particularly, it's one that can come up in developing consciousnesses, right? So a lot of us have when we're younger. Schopenhauer is a German philosopher from the 1800s who had this same wonderance.
Yeah.
And he was in the realm of philosophy. He wrote aphorisms, which is collections of short thoughts that, in the spirit of Schopenhauer's pessimism, could be described as the lazy writings of a bunch of guys that didn't want to actually put them coherently in a row. They just wanted to write down truthisms over and over again and then call it a book. And Schopenhauer himself probably would describe it this way as a pessimist himself. But he was certain that color was subjective. And he had philosophical reasoning behind this. Now, we can talk about the physics behind the ways that rods and cones work inside somebody's eyeballs, and they were beginning to understand this at the time. Actually, some of his work was involved in understanding rods and cones with I believe it was Hume as well as him at the same time. But he argued that the individual, because of the fact that we are all individually only experiencing what we experience, and we're only aware of what's inside our own brains, our bodies being vessels of information gathering for those brains and those minds. He was certain that color was subjective because it's influenced by more than just the experience, but by the natural phenomenon surrounding the observed object. So, in the same way that he would argue that, you know, moving a light around a blue object might make the shade change, right, just for one observer, he also argued that from observer to observer, the blues were likely different. And those were also probably influenced by the subconscious interactions that those people might have had with different colors. Okay. Maybe you had a really bad experience with a babysitter that had blue walls at their house. And so you don't like blue as much as somebody else, right? And maybe, you have fond memories of the blue skies at a family cabin in the summers. And so you see those two people having very different experiences with a single color.
Or purple is seen as a girl's color in a lot of the U.S., but then in Minnesota, it's seen as the Vikings' color.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's not necessarily seen as
culturally subjective. Exactly. Yep. All of these interact with what Schopenhauer called the will. The will. Yes, and in this 45-minute essay, I will tell you how George Lucas ripped off Schopenhauer's work. I won't. But the will is very much like the Force in Star Wars. According to Schopenhauer, it's a universal, aimless desire for the universe to perpetuate itself, and the basis of all life. Desire rises from the will, and desire rising from the will is the source of all sorrow in the world. So, life wants to just continue being itself, and wants to continue without any purpose, according to Schopenhauer. And desire is when the will, this great force that causes wanting, is unmet, right? And so every time we are satisfied in our desire, we are left with either boredom or a new desire to take its place. According to Schopenhauer, a world enthralled to will is necessarily a world of suffering. Since the will is the source of life, and our very bodies are stamped with its image and designed to serve its purpose, the human intellect is, as Schopenhauer stated, like a lame man who can see, but who rides on the shoulders of a blind giant. Okay. All of this leads us to Schopenhauer's aesthetics. So he develops and works on, there's many other works that influence his overall view, which results in pessimism, which is what we're talking about today. Many people, throw around the label of like, oh, don't be such a pessimist, or, optimists see the glass half full and pessimists see the glass half empty, without realizing that it's actually a school of philosophy that still has modern philosophers today that are working at the leading edge of the field in academia that attribute themselves to it. But Schopenhauer was at the time a leading pessimist within the realm of philosophy, ultimately believing that there isn't much of a purpose for the world and that the world is mostly suffering because we all want for something and there's no reason for us to want it. But his view of aesthetics, which he wrote on greatly, is a response to pessimism that naturally comes from this worldview. Schopenhauer believed that what distinguished aesthetic experiences from other experiences is the contemplation of the object of aesthetic appreciation temporarily allowed the subject a respite from the strife of desire.
Uh-huh.
Essentially, Schopenhauer thinks everything is made up. Nothing is real other than what's going on inside your own mind.
It's all constructed.
And it's all constructed, right? Plato's allegory of the cave.
Yep.
Right? All of our experiences are just the sensory inputs that we're getting. We can't actually know for sure that this table is the way that it is. I just know that when I touch it, it feels a bit cold. There's a firm response on the tips of my fingers. All of those nerves fire and give me this information. In that same vein, he essentially said that the appreciation of something that you find aesthetically pleasing, like art, allows you to fully commit to the reality that everything's made up. Nothing matters. The world is as it is, waning in its way and following no listful purpose. But the viewer entering this realm of purely mental enjoyment and purely a representation or mental image, the more that Schopenhauer believed that the more the person's mind is concerned with the world as representation, the less it feels the suffering of the world as will. Schopenhauer analyzed art from its effects both on the personality of the artist and the personality of the viewer, which extends from his view of the way that color interacts differently from one viewer to another. Schopenhauer also believed fundamentally that an artist, when making art, is inherently trying to say something. Mm-hmm. And there's a nature of the raw primal will of the universe that is crafted into that.
Yeah.
That then allows another person, even without having a remotely similar experience or feeling towards the art, they can view it and yet still experience the primal will of the universe through the appreciation of its aesthetic.
Okay.
What do you think?
I think that Schopenhauer, you said pessimist, and I was like, oh, I'm not a pessimist. I hate to be like that guy who's just so reactionary.
I think pessimism is demonized in our society.
I will say that as a therapist, if you meet someone who is very negative about everything in the world and themselves, you're almost like more concerned about them in a lot of ways.
It's in the DSM, right?
Yeah, that if they're pessimistic, it's negative. You don't like that.
Negative self-talk. We pathologize pessimism. Yeah.
Yeah. At the same time, I think that it's important to be realistic, but there is a level to which pessimism will interfere with your daily life, and that it can lead to kind of depression. But I think that there's value in listening to those thoughts, because the opposite is like a toxic positivity thing, where it's just like everything is positive. This was a learning experience. My father's death was a learning experience. I never really. It's okay. I'm over it. You're not really over it. You have to be negative. You have to experience the negative, and if you don't experience the negative, positive has no meaning. I don't know if anyone who's ever in the chat or the YouTube comments is ever going to say, "Oh, I've never had a negative experience in my life." I mean,
Certainly.
the person who says that, please call me, because I'd
be interested to meet you.
I'd be interested to meet you. But I think that life is about the ups and the downs.
What do you think about aesthetics or aesthetic appreciation as a silver bullet, essentially?
Yeah, that it's the one thing.
It sounds like it was his thing, at least. I mean, he wrote about it a lot. He seemed to like art enough to suppose it or put it forth as his principle.
Oh my gosh!
Oh no!
The dog has moved the camera. That's so funny.
Woman.
That's really funny.
There's our dog on the camera.
Oh,
thank you so much.
Wants to be loved. Oh, that's gonna live in YouTube forever, Ben. That's great.
Oh yeah,
that's
she's
great.
A star.
That is infinite. Just the stuff you deal with on the internet. So. Yeah, Toad's a good doggo, but yeah, definitely feeling a little needy tonight. Yeah, that's for sure.
All right.
So, but yes, aesthetics. So yeah, I think that art is a medium in which people experience the world. They can look at someone else's worldview through art. I remember growing up, everyone was like, books is, a window into that person's mind and that person's world. And I think that art is, very much so that. I think that video games are art, like Zelda, but I also think that art includes, paintings and writings, and
music.
A lot of other music and a lot of other more subtle things, and that you can get into someone else's perspective by experiencing their art.
Yeah.
So
I think Schopenhauer would agree with that. It sounds like he was a huge fan of art as the whole. He actually wrote critiques of Greek opera, or not Greek opera, German opera.
I believe that.
Of the time.
Yeah.
And his big thing was at the time technical ability, especially in like falsettos and being able to strain one's voice and things was very popular. And he wrote very curmudgeonly opinions in like newspaper pieces on how he thought that pure skill and artistic expression and the beauty of art as itself was more important than the pursuit of who can do the most, technical trill of their voice and whatnot. Which was countercultural at the time. People were really into their specific opera singers.
Yeah, the impressiveness of
Feats.
the performance.
Yes.
Feats as opposed to meaning.
Yes, I think he probably would have not liked wrestling.
I don't think that he would like modern cinema.
No, I think he might not like modern cinema a lot. Yes.
Spectacle over substance.
Yes. Modern cinema that is good, though. Green Knight. Go watch it. Speaking of the Green Knight,
I have
Link
not watched it. I need to.
Is a knightish person in green.
Kind of. In some instances, yes, he's a knight. Okay.
Yeah.
Hyrule Warriors, he's got the knight outfit.
Yep.
I'll give you that.
Yep.
Can we talked a lot about Link, but this is a masculinity podcast, and
Yeah.
I think that we should address Ganondorf and some of the villains that appear in the Zelda series a little bit. I think that I'm just gonna name the obvious thing of Ganondorf is the black guy in Zelda, and he's the bad guy.
Yeah.
I mean, just the things that go along with that are just kind of obvious.
Yeah.
He's a man from the desert too. I don't know if you know this, Ben, but in the original edition of Ocarina of Time, they had a moon and star as the Gerudo symbol rather than the funny little like 3-piece thing that they have in the current edition of Ocarina of Time. I don't know if that's in your mod that you played. Now we've got a cat on the table.
Got a cat joining us too.
Hey, come over here, Kermit. You're just a lovely kitten. But yeah, they had this the moon and star on.
I know they've caught some heat for the Gerudos as a whole,
and they also had caught some heat for some chanting in the fire temple for like
religious symbols. It was an Islamic chant.
Yeah, and I think that the stereotypes that are in there, are real, but also I think that Ganondorf is someone, and to me, I think his greatest moment comes in the Wind Waker, because he explains in just a few lines of dialogue as you're about to fight him at the end of the Wind Waker that his kingdom lie in a vast desert, and that when the wind blew across his kingdom, it brought either scorching heat in the day that would burn us, or a frigid cold at night that would freeze them. Mm-hmm. And across Hyrule, that wasn't the case. And so he says that he coveted that wind, that he was in a place that was not with privilege, that was with difficulty. And he was honestly trying to make a better place for his people, but through power and not through wisdom or smart alliances or whatever else. And I think that was meaningful to me. That he, it allowed me to see
he's got a motivation that's 3D.
In a different light, yes. Yeah. And I do think that other Zelda games do paint him as just kind of a general villain. In Ocarina of Time, he's more of a general, just kind of like traitor sort of guy, where he... the cat. Oh, I'll just have you go over there now. Yeah, where he was trusting... the King of Hyrule was trusting Ganondorf, and Ganondorf kind of turned his back on him. And so we kind of have this, desert man betrays white people thing that's happening.
Which, engage in a little bit of apologetics, Toad, we're not playing right now. We're not going to play with the kitty. Come here.
Oh, we're just having pet show tonight?
Yes, we are. At 7. Pet show and tell with Zelda. To do a little bit of apologetics for Nintendo, they, especially earlier Zelda games, right? They're drawing on the European medieval fantasy tradition, Lord of the Rings being the biggest player in the historical game there. But I especially with the themes around the forest and the guy in the green, he's in a green tunic. He's not a knight. You're right. He's a guy in a green tunic wearing a bow. There's a lot of Robin Hood influences, and Robin Hood famously happens. The story of Robin Hood is going on because King John is off on the Crusades. Lawrence of Arabia, right? These stories that are going on are that the source material that they're drawing from, essentially, I'm saying, has significant a history of racially depicting, particularly the Moors and like the Umayyad and the Abbasid dynasty as the bad guys, right? And so I think that, especially to be a little bit apologist to the Japanese people that were making a story that is rooted in the cultural histories, traditions, and narratives of a different culture.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately telling a good story with it in a way that I don't think is in any sort. I'm not going to be mad that Japanese people appropriated Robin Hood for this story. It's a good story. Go ahead. Like, I don't care. I think that's probably the origin of where that came from. I see a lot of Moorish influence in the Gerudo people, and I think it's, the place where it connects or gets fit in with the Japanese cultural hangups or social ideas towards certain concepts, especially the one man with hundreds of wives kind of concept, is where it starts to get muddy, and it makes it hard to defend.
The single man in the Gerudo. I don't know. I do go. Interestingly, I do go Dune a little bit there, where the desert is a harsh place to live, and that's where Ganondorf is from. Yeah. It's kind of like a frontier. Which is interesting because I think that Ganondorf also represents kind of this assumption that as a man you can be solely strong, and that solely strong is enough to be a man. And you kind of do look at Ganondorf and you're sort of like, well, he's got the power, he's got, an army of women that he's working with, but at the same time he doesn't really have like the relationships that a lot of other guys would have in life, that he's earned in a kingship. Because even within his kingdom, if you look at Ocarina of Time, Nabooru is rebelling against him. I will never bow to such an evil man, she says. I love that line, so good.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that Ganondorf does kind of represent this, kind of like imbalance of power, where he's, power is the only thing that matters. And I think that a lot of men can kind of get stuck in that trap. And I think that because I was, looking at Zelda at a very early age, I didn't feel like that was a trap that I would get stuck in, that I only wanted to look for power and nothing more. But I do think that if you're looking at the full Triforce, if you are trying to be the hero, you are going to have to seek power. You are going to have to seek strength. It is going to be necessary. But if you only become obsessed with just becoming more powerful and bigger just for the purpose of having ability and not necessarily being a well-rounded person, you're not necessarily going to get what you're looking for.
Yeah. You mentioning him having a piece of the Triforce, I think is important and significant too. Right? The two heroes, Zelda and Link, have the pieces of the Triforce, the wisdom and the courage, and he has power, right?
Yes.
I think that there's something interesting in the narrative there that's presented by the fact that the villain has one of the three pieces that is holding the whole world together and stuff. Mm-hmm. And another thing that you had mentioned that it drew me back to that C.S. Lewis quote was, I think that he is, like, even while being a three-dimensional character like that, I think that there is an element of, I hear in what you're saying, that you as a kid saw this story of good knights and bad knights, or good Robin Hood and bad knight guy, bad evil sorcerer guy, and it doesn't have to be overly complex with which I think there are good narratives that do that, but it is this good, simple story that stands on its own merit, that here's an example of somebody you don't want to be in this game about going back and forth between the future you and the you that you are right now as a kid playing it.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that those kinds of narratives are important and really helpful.
Yeah, I think that they are. I was going to say something, but I forgot what it was.
Oh, can I ask you a question?
Oh, sure, go on.
What is the best item in all of the Zelda games?
The best item?
Yeah.
Now, this is not the sword. This is not the shield. You're asking about an accessory item?
Yeah, I am.
I think the hook shot.
The hook shot, you think is...
Yeah, no hesitation.
Okay.
The hook shot is very cool because you can use it unlimited times. It hits lots of foes. You can go places with it. There's lots of different iterations of it. Like, Zelda purists might say, well, the claw shot in Twilight Princess is different. But you get two of them, and so then you start going like this, and you're like Spider-Manning all over the place. Then you're
with
going
the
down with
in
the
thing?
Yeah, well, kind of.
I don't remember Twilight Princess that much. I
It's
remember turning into a wolf. That was cool as shit.
Yeah, I think that the hookshot's cool. I remember what I was gonna say now.
Yeah.
The idea, Zelda is also kind of like got this timeless story thing going on. I will say that Breath of the Wild leans into this, and they say in that trailer that I've seen 1,000 times of Breath of the Wild that is so badass, you just have no idea. I watch it when I'm in a terrible mood.
It's uplifting, even.
It makes me cry.
You're talking about the one where they go down in the cave and they
No,
get
no,
us
no,
in?
no,
Oh,
no,
the
no,
other
no,
one.
no, no,
The
no,
one for
no,
the
no,
first
no,
game.
no, the one for Breath of the Wild.
Sure.
Yeah, it's excellent. And yeah, Impa talks about the Calamity Ganon, a primal evil that has endured through the ages, which is just Zelda is always so simple, but I feel like it is rich with meaning. Where Ganon is something that is destined to return, and so I feel like Zelda overall it represents the hero's journey. And I feel like I've said that 1,000 times today, 1,000 times over this season. But Zelda is so quintessentially is like, yeah, I mean, the purpose of the hero's journey is that it will repeat itself, and that there will always be another hero that will rise, and there will always be another villain, and something bad that will rise. But that you shouldn't necessarily lose hope, even if it looks like all hope is lost. I mean, for fuck's sake, in Ocarina of Time, the world basically gets destroyed and Ganondorf wins, and then you're just like, oh well, I guess I better go save the world now.
Yeah.
And that happens a few times in Zelda. I mean,
Yeah.
the whole point of Breath of the Wild is Link died and had to take 100 years to recover in some pod, and now he has to go save the world again. And so I think that the villains do win a lot of times in these games, but the point is that the hero does always rise to the occasion to do something about it, and that Link will always be the hero. And I do think that is something that even Ganondorf will acknowledge in the Zelda. I knew you would appear, the hero. I think the Wind Waker, he always appears. So yeah, I do think that the repetitiveness of the hero's journey and the necessity of it to continue is absolutely a theme that is in Zelda
And
too.
I think I would, my lens on it a bit is that part of the uniqueness of the hero's journey that's found within Zelda, the games, all of them as a whole, is that it comes from this origin of particularly saving memory space on the NES, and also ease of translation into other languages for early titles. It by necessity has a little bit of that. It needs to be simple, and I think that in the ways that art can be created when we give ourselves limitations, like what was done with that having to limit the amount of dialogue and things like that for translation purposes and stuff, results in these games that, like you said, are rich with meaning. They're simple and yet meaningful. And I think that the way that the writers and Nintendo rose to that challenge was by creating something that they knew would be transcendent of language barriers, of cultural barriers, right? I think tapping into things like human cultures just generally have a primal respect for categorizing the elements, and so some of those things kind of rise up organically like that. And I think that it takes, just because they come up organically doesn't mean that a great gardener didn't come along and make sure that those rows of that garden were well kept.
Yeah. I will sometimes criticize like Ganondorf in Tears of the Kingdom, the newest Zelda, because I feel like he was too two-dimensional and just evil. But I do think that, if you are looking across culturally, a very simple thing is, the ambitious man who only wants power and will do anything in order to get it. And that's, not necessarily something that's new in this world. That's something that you've seen for a long time. I just played Hogwarts Legacy, and there's, a girl in there. I'm sorry, it's a girl from Africa whose name is now escaping me.
Oh yeah, her mom teaches at the school.
And her mom teaches divination at the school. But yeah, so she says, I've always known men like him. The guy who only wants power. And I think that really encapsulates what they're trying to do with Ganondorf a lot of times. And yeah, there's the racial undertones there, but I think that is represented in Tears of the Kingdom well, even though he doesn't have the complexity of, Wind Waker Ganondorf.
Yeah. Speaking of men like that, I think we're coming to a close here. I think I've got a good quote about that, actually.
Yeah.
This actually comes from Arthur Schopenhauer, who we talked about in our Poorly Explained Philosophy segment today. He once wrote, "Every miserable fool who has nothing at all of which he can be proud adopts as a last resort as a last resource pride in the nation to which he belongs. He is ready and happy to defend all of its faults and follies, tooth and nail, thus reimbursing himself for his own inferiority."
Ben, how can you leave us with such a quote?
I can leave you with that kind of quote because we've been talking about good and evil, and I think the nature of good and evil is ever present in that statement. I think that Arthur Schopenhauer was a pessimist, and so you can hear his disdain a bit Perhaps some might call disdain for humans in that aphorism, but I think that quote is profound.
Yeah.
When we're having a lot of conversations about people that are really into their nation at this time.
I think that if you look at the history of the world, there are some nations that have done some really, really bad and fucked up things. Yeah. And I think that there are some nations that have done some good things.
Yeah, that's true. With that said, though, we would like to address that we're coming to a close at the end of this season here.
Yes, we are.
Max and Men Save the World. We'll be running reruns for a little while, and doing some other projects in expanding our social media and things like that.
Trying to get on Spotify.
Yeah, we will rejoin you for new live episodes sometime in June, probably mid-June, and we'll be looking at what makes a man healthy. Yes. What makes a healthy man.
Absolutely.
So we look forward to seeing you again mid-June for our third series.
And go follow us on Facebook and Instagram in the meantime.
Yeah, follow us on Facebook, Instagram. We re-upload these VODs to YouTube. Anyways, thank you so much for listening. Be kind to each other.
See you next time.